Hello, everyone, and please welcome to the U.S. Center our event today, Mobilizing and Localizing Climate Finance. It's my pleasure to introduce Chief Climate Officer for USAID, Gillian Caldwell.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the U.S. Center and to our event on mobilizing and localizing climate finance. I'm very excited for today's event and, as always, to learn something from our fantastic panel. This is obviously a critically important topic. If there's any issue around which the negotiations have struggled, it is the question of money and how it is we're going to pay for the estimated $3 to $5 trillion a year we're going to be needing by 2030 to tackle this climate crisis. So this is an opportunity for USAID and Prosper Africa and our many partners and allies to talk about what we're doing to try to tackle that tremendous challenge. We set a goal as USAID to catalyze $150 billion in public and private finance by 2030. And today we'll be talking about how we plan to do that, which of course involves the critical partnership between both the public and the private sector. When it comes to the private sector, especially as regards adaptation finance, which has been sorely underinvested in, this is about more than doing the right thing. It's about doing the smart thing when it comes to the business case. And in fact, at tomorrow's session here in the U.S. Center, I really urge you to join us to hear from BCG that has done a report as part of our call to action on adaptation and resilience on the business case for adaptation. So I think that'll be quite an interesting conversation. But I'm going to turn it over momentarily now to our administrator, Samantha Power, who I've had the pleasure to know for almost 30 years. I'm dating myself, and who's just really the sort of the beating heart amongst many 10,000 beating hearts of USAID, and who's been pushing us so hard to become a climate agency, by which we mean not an agency that stops doing all that we do on democracy, rights and governance, and education and humanitarian affairs, but one that recognizes that we cannot achieve what we hope to in advancing development progress without tackling the defining crisis of our time. So please welcome the only woman who makes me feel like a slouch, Administrator Samantha Power.
Thank you, Gillian, for your extraordinary leadership at USAID and in the world. Decades from now, generations from now, we will remember this period in our government as a whole as an inflection point, as President Biden likes to say. And it's because of people like you and your team integrating this agenda, as you said, across all sectors of development. Thank you to our panelists. I can't wait to hear the extraordinary group of people that we have gathered today. And thanks to the amazing leaders who are here, who are at the vanguard of figuring out how to surge climate finance to the developing economies that need it most. As you all know, this isn't just the $1 million question. It is the $2 trillion question. That is roughly the level of financing that developing and emerging economies, excluding China, need every year by 2030 to meet their climate goals, to adapt infrastructure and food systems that serve 3.6 billion people, to help communities recover from worsening disasters, to build clean energy that allows them to keep developing their economies without surpassing our global emissions goals. For us at development agencies like USAID, that $2 trillion of need forces a real reckoning, a genuine reckoning. If we were to take all of the official development assistance and finance coming from every nation on the planet and redirect it just toward climate action, which of course we would never be able to do given the multitude of other challenges that we face, that would meet only a sixth of the total need that is out there. There is simply no way to meet the climate finance need without a sharp increase in private sector investment. So you may be expecting me to spend my time today stressing the reasons why it is vital for the private sector to step up, to save lives, to avoid mass displacement, to accept historic responsibility, to prevent historic instability, and to prevent the worst effects of climate change from falling on those who did the least to cause the problem in the first place. We've all been at events like that and heard arguments of that nature, which are very valid. But at USAID, and I'm sure at many of the institutions where you work, what we hear again and again from private sector partners and entrepreneurs is that actually they don't really need to be convinced that these investments are essential. They pretty much get that already. What they need is for us to help make these investments practically possible. That is a really, really important distinction. 88% of developing countries and all but 3 African countries have credit ratings so low that many formal investors simply cannot take on the risk. Many of the climate investments we need are in new and innovative solutions, which are, of course, by definition, risky by their very nature. In other words, it's not a lack of will per se that is keeping climate investment from flowing to emerging markets. It is this prohibitive level of risk. So here at USAID, we are increasing our focus on helping private investors manage the risks that come with investing in emerging markets and in new, inherently risky solutions. Today, I am thrilled to announce that early next year, the Green Guarantee Company, the first privately run guarantee company devoted to green bonds and loans in developing countries, will officially launch. Because providing investment-grade guarantees vastly increases the number of investors that can support these projects, the U.S. government's $10 million in seed funding is expected to help the Green Guarantee Company catalyze $1 billion in new investment to least developed countries for climate adaptation and mitigation. By using, again, what is a relatively small amount of public dollars, we can help harness the scale and sophistication of the private sector and crowd in more mainstream flows of private finance to developing markets. At the same time, we are helping to nurture emerging solutions, particularly from local leaders, through the risky early stages to help build a pipeline of proven, investable projects to take on climate challenges. For instance, one major challenge that most of you are familiar with leaves Africa's smallholder farmers vulnerable to climate shock, and that is that many are not covered by insurance, in part because it is very, very tough to run an insurance business in remote places where inspecting damage in the wake of a climate emergency is hugely expensive, and both the premiums and the potential payouts are comparatively small. That means that when disasters come, farmers often have to do things like sell their vital livestock or harvest crops before they are ready. This, of course, can be incredibly destructive to their long-term earning potential. So a few months ago, at the UN General Assembly, as part of USAID's adaptation finance window, we made a call to insurance companies to come up with proposals for promising solutions. We got dozens of responses, no surprise there, and today I am happy to announce the first 3 of 5 grants that we will be giving to insurance technology companies, Floodbase, Blue Marble, and WTW, to help them develop their proposed solutions. Floodbase, for example, is working with another USAID grantee called Africa Risk Capital Limited to provide flood insurance to farmers in Mozambique and Malawi. They are assessing the damage not by physical inspections, which are time-consuming and costly, but using satellite flood tracking data to assess water flows. That helps get farmers quick payouts so their livelihoods are not destroyed after floods. Flood-Base's analysis found that if its program had been in place during Cyclone Idai in March of 2019, more than 10,000 farmers in the central regions of Mozambique could have received up to a $100 cash payout within days of the event, helping them avoid acute food insecurity and replant and rebuild. Because Flood-Base doesn't rely on physical infrastructure to do its work, once they have proven their solution is working in Mozambique and Malawi, the hope is that they can draw in private investors to quickly scale across Africa. Through investments like these, we will build a pipeline of investable solutions that can draw in more private investment and help get investors and entrepreneurs in the 80 countries we work with the tools they need to access and direct investment. After all, it is local communities that know best. They know best how to prepare their communities for the impacts of climate change. And for that reason, we have been championing the principles on locally led adaptation, and we are prioritizing solutions that come from local organizations and indigenous and youth leaders who are most attuned to their community's needs. The bottom line is this, in closing, we need private investment to generate finance on the scale we need. And we need public investment to get that finance to flow to the communities that need it most. I'm really eager to hear more from all of our partners on how we can work together to meet this critical moment and to take advantage of this inflection point. Thank you so much.
Beware the ramps at this COP. Samantha mentioned the Green Guarantee Company that we're announcing today, which is so exciting, with an initial tranche of $100 million in funding to catalyze an estimated $1 billion to tackle these finance gaps. And I just want to acknowledge all of the fantastic contributors to that fund and invite many others to join, because we want to get to $600 million soon, thereby catalyzing an estimated $6 billion. So, by way of acknowledgement and to express our gratitude, we've got UK FCDO in the mix. We have the Green Climate Fund. We have, of course, Prosper Africa. We'll be hearing from British any minute. We have the Nigerian Sovereign Investment Authority. We have Norfund from Norway. And we have the State Department with a special envoy for climate office under Spec Carey. So so excited to be able to announce this today. It's been a labor of love for many, many people, and I'm very excited to see where we're headed with it. But without further ado, I'm going to introduce British Robinson, who is the coordinator of Power Africa. Prosper Africa. We have Power and we have Prosper. They're both presidential level initiatives, although doing different things. She's going to talk more about the important work of Prosper Africa. But the focus is really on strengthening the strategic and economic partnership between the United States and the African continent. And British is well placed to be playing this role. She's spent over 30 years in development finance, previously working at Citi, as well as with the Jesuit Conference, sort of leading on the social impact investing space. And she also was in the State Department with PEPFAR, which is our AIDS relief program in Africa. And in that context, she was leading public and private partnerships. So I can't imagine anybody better suited to lead Prosper Africa than British. And I welcome you to the stage to moderate the panel. Thanks.
Thank you so much, and good morning, everyone. It's wonderful to be here. Thank you, Gillian, and thank you, Administrator Power. Again, I'm British Robinson. I serve as the coordinator of Prosper Africa. For many people, if you don't know Prosper Africa, we're a national security and presidential initiative to strengthen the strategic and economic partnership by catalyzing two-way trade and investment flows on the continent of Africa. We bring together 17 government agencies utilizing their tools, instruments, and services around key sectors in Africa, such as renewable energy, information technology, finance, critical minerals, and infrastructure in order to crowd in private sector resources to the continent. We are a bit different from your usual aid or development program in that we are truly market-driven. Today, in a world where government budgets are unpredictable and thinly stretched, as the administrator mentioned, private sector capital and market innovation are absolutely critical to see real change happen, particularly in the climate change space. The private sector drives innovation and invests multiples of what the public sector can invest in growth. And for global challenges like climate change, the world needs all the innovation and resourcing we can muster to address that $1 trillion gap of annual investments. The official development finance system as a whole, all assistance dollars, all development finance dollars combined, currently provides about $235 billion a year. This is woefully inadequate to address the challenges. This doesn't even come close. There are not enough dollars to be deployed. Climate finance globally is doubling. However, only 1% is deployed in Africa. At the same time, global private investments have grown exponentially to over $400 trillion. These massive pools of capital have become underutilized resource base on the global stage despite their growing appetite for higher financial, social, and environmental returns in emerging and frontier markets. Just 1% of these assets would significantly close investment gaps, leveraging the scale and sophistication of new actors. In order to really close the gap and to bring in these new actors, as the administrator said, we have to truly do real de-risking, and not just investing or partnering one-on-one alongside each other, but to actually use public capital to reduce the risk and draw in private sector dollars. That is why Prosper Africa has invested in the first privately run guarantee company, green guarantee company, which Administrator Power just mentioned. We at Prosper were absolutely thrilled to partner with GGC and proud to source this deal with our colleagues at USAID. This is truly innovative, and we can't wait to see how far we can go with this. Our goal is $1 billion. Our panel today will discuss a range of activities and ways in which we can continue to grow private sector dollars, mobilize and support localizing climate finance. And so I'd like to get after it. So I welcome the panelists to the stage. Thank you. First, Debbie Palmer. Debbie is the Director for Energy, Climate and Environment at the UK Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office. Las Pereira, the CEO of Green Guarantee Company. Aminu, CEO of Nigeria's Sovereign Investment Authority. Louise Cord, Global Director of the Social Sustainability and Inclusion Practice Group at the World Bank. And last but not least, Ariane Pevev, the Director for Climate Finance at Mitsubishi UFJ Financial Group. Thank you all for being here. So we'll first do a bit of a round robin with our panelists, and I'll kick off with our first question. As leaders in diverse institutions, each of you bring a very unique perspective to the table when we're talking about mobilizing and localizing climate finance. What strategies have you found most effective to mobilize climate finance? And what specific strategies or initiatives are in place to ensure that climate finance not only reaches large-scale projects, but also reaches those most vulnerable, most impacted by climate change? Debbie, do you want to kick us off? Thanks.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. It's a real pleasure to be here. I suppose the first thing I want to say is that this feels really timely to be focusing on localization. It's been a big theme for us at the COP. It's something that we in the British government have been reflecting on greatly. We published a new UK government white paper just a fortnight ago called International Development in a Contested World, Ending Extreme Poverty and Tackling Climate Change. So that's, if I may say, a bit of a coup for those of us who spend a lot of time in the climate space, because finally there is upfront an absolutely crystal clear recognition that it's not poverty or climate, it's poverty and climate. Because if you're a rural woman sitting in, if you're a woman sitting in rural Mozambique, Somalia, Bolivia, pick your country, the forces and the pressures upon you are coming from all sorts of directions, and we don't want any longer to have siloed conversations. We really want to be as person-centric as possible. And that's where I think we get to the localization theme. The UK was one of the first countries to endorse the GCA's principles for locally led adaptation in January 2021. And we have engaged considerably through our support to the multilateral climate funds, especially the GCF, where we're heavily invested, but also through the GEF, through the CIFs, through the Adaptation Fund. And really what we're hoping to do as we work with those, in partnership with those funds, is to think about how we can ease access. We can simplify access, we can speed up access to funding. And for me, access down to the local level is, if you like, the litmus test of whether these funds are really reaching their full potential to serve the people who most need the supports. So this is about how do we ease off the procedures and a range of other things to make those funds flow quicker. We also support countries as they seek to channel a higher proportion of climate finance directly down to local level, and directly not just hold it at national government level, but actually make sure it flows through the system. So the UK is supporting the LIFE AR initiative, which is aiming to ensure at least 70% of climate finance reaches local level by 2030. And that's about, again, how do we come good on this commitment to make sure the finance gets down to local communities. And in line with those commitments, we really seek to ensure that fragile and conflict-affected states are also included and enabled to make the best of climate funds, because, again, that's, if you like, the toughest end of the spectrum. So we're scoping out how we can build resilience through support to early warnings, early action, and practical, very practical and pragmatic adaptation initiatives that help reduce the extreme climate impacts, or indeed, ideally, build up so that we can eliminate some of the needs for large-scale humanitarian interventions. So through supporting kind of voice, empowerment of local communities and institutions at local level, we hope there could be a greater likelihood of ensuring the funding reaches down and is best tailored to local community needs. So it's all about kind of getting away from the prescriptive top-down approaches and supporting those projects at scale.
Good morning, everyone. So, as the CEO of the Green Guarantee Company, I guess you understand if I say guarantees are what I think I've seen mobilize local and global capital markets the best. But let's think about why is that. So, when I talk about guarantees to people, I start with reminding people of a proverb that most people have probably heard, and that's, if you give someone a fish, you feed them for a day. If you teach them to fish, you feed them for life. So fundamentally, a guarantee helps build knowledge, and with knowledge, that empowers them. And that's really what we are trying to do with the guarantee product. That's why it's so powerful in my view. It actually builds capacity of the individual, but then that individual then helps build capacity of others, and then effectively you create an ecosystem of able people that can actually then deliver change long term. And that's fundamentally can start with a guarantee. I'm not going to steal Aminu's thunder, but he could probably talk about the work InfraCredit Nigeria have done in terms of transforming the market there in the energy sector, for example. But fundamentally, what we have seen for the work that we've done with guarantees is that investors as we were hearing from the speakers earlier, are scared of risk that they don't understand. The guarantee helps them come in and take that risk, learn about it, understand what the actual risk is versus their perception of that risk, and then eventually price that risk correctly. And that is how markets are created, and effectively, if that's done well, you don't need the guarantees very quickly. And then everyone starts to invest without them, and then, that's really what we're trying to do with the guarantee. It's meant to be catalytic. I'm going to stop there, I think.
Thank you. A real privilege being here. I think alongside the guarantees and the top-down approach, I'll probably say three things. I'll speak about carbon credits. And I feel like, particularly in frontier economies, it's important that we defragmentize. We ensure that we have effective carbon market frameworks in place to ensure that projects that are effectively developed actually generate high integrity credits that can easily find a home by buyers. So I think that's number one. It's extremely important. I think number two would be that technical assistance and project preparatory facilities around enhancing the capacity to develop the kinds of projects for which capital can be mobilized. I think there is a significant gap, even though the need is clear in frontier economies, but I think the ability and the risk capital required to execute upon the kinds of projects that can generate the credits for acquisition is also fundamental. And I think the third, which is orthogonal to what Lars mentioned, is around how do we mobilize local currency, long-term capital, particularly from conservative capital providers, to greenfield, climate-aligned projects. And I think we would require a combination of first loss capital as well as guarantees in order to move that. And I think for frontier economies like ours, I think that is such an important point because currency mismatch is always a big hindrance as to why capital isn't attracted to infrastructure projects. So if we find a way of actually utilizing local currency to develop projects that generate hard currency assets in terms of the carbon credits, then it's a no-brainer. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for this opportunity. And it's really good to see that locally led climate action is getting such attention at this COP. It is certainly something as Director of Social Sustainability that we've been really keen to see expanded. Right now, the latest statistics suggest that only 10% of climate finance actually reaches local communities, and less than 1% reaches indigenous communities. So I want to highlight three things that we're doing at the World Bank to ensure that we're expanding resource flows directly to local communities. First is building on community-driven development initiatives that deliver funds to local communities. Under IDA 20, we committed to give financing to 15 countries by June 2025 for locally led climate action. I'm pleased to report, but by the midterm review that's happening right now in Zanzibar, we're already at 17 countries for $3.5 billion for locally led climate action. A great example of this, separate from the IDA funds, is what we're doing in Kenya, where we provided $150 million to support community resilience plans that are funded through financing going through the decentralized fiscal system to local governments. This has been programmatic in approach. It has allowed us to do participatory approaches, and it has also allowed us to crowd in financing from other donors. In addition to the $150 million, we're seeing $65 million come in co-financing from Sweden, Denmark, and Germany, which has been really great to see. We're also using existing platforms in 11 countries in West Africa, where some of the biggest challenges are in the Sahel, Horn of Africa, Lake Chad, and Bay of Guinea, to expand locally led climate actions in our portfolio for a total of $1.5 billion. So that's one of the core actions that we're taking. But we're also working to help create, as you may have heard, we talked this week with President Ajay Banga about carbon markets with integrity. And for us, this means supporting indigenous communities to better access carbon markets and benefit sharing programs. Through the Forest Carbon Partnership Framework, we're supporting countries getting ERPAs under RED Plus and under carbon markets to enhance their ability to access benefit sharing plans and to be part of the overall process of carbon markets. And then finally, I want to mention what we're doing on climate mitigation, because a lot of what we talked about was adaptation at the local level, but we all know a lot is a mitigation. And just for context, World Bank funding right now, last year, was $38 billion for climate finance, 50-50 adaptation and mitigation, 40% to Africa. But we're struggling on moving faster on the mitigation agenda. That's very clear. And I want to make the point that to do that, we need to enhance support and financing to local communities. It takes time to work with communities. I think that's the experience of many of our developed countries that have tried to exit coal, to engage in the community dialogue, to look at how you're going to repurpose, to build the support with unions, to engage on diversification with local and build the infrastructure with local governments. So these are key things that happen way before we start closing the coal power plants and mines. And so I'm really pleased that this year the World Bank launched its coal phase-down program, where we're collaborating with our energy team and with our social protection and job team to do some of this necessary upstream. Now, I have just a quick question to you, moderator. I also want to talk about 3 things we're doing to scale up and leverage what everybody else is doing. Do you want me to do that now? After. Got it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And just speaking on what everyone has been saying, and just from the perspective of a large commercial bank, I see, and what the administrator was saying about the inflection point, I think it's a very inflection point about the mindset of everyone involved. And on FCDO, pushing the climate, the funds as GCF to be more nimble, to work more at the local space. We see the local sovereign wealth funds taking a leadership position, not only locally, but regionally and globally. And I think that is a signaling of the capacity that the local governments have to drive change, not only at home, but elsewhere as well. And I think, finally, from a banker's perspective, we're also having a change in mindset of how we operate. We always keep hearing in all these panels the bankable projects concept. That is a concept that needs to change. A bankable project of climate mitigation in developed world, all bankers have a checklist of what they look for when they're looking at a project. That has to go out of the window. When you go and look for a project in developing economies, you have to be with the country. And I think that's a strong point that we make to our partners in the Global South, is the country ownership, and the countries need to drive. They are the demand. We are the supply of capital. They need to drive their demand. The money needs to go where it needs to be, and it's for the countries to do that and not for the capital to dictate where it should go. And I think it's all these inflections that we are seeing in behavior of the countries, of the donor governments, of the MDBs, and of the private sector. And I think that ties very nicely to GGC. MUFG is the accredited agency of the GCF for this project. And we are also one of the originating banks together with LAS. And we need to be ambitious, but we need to be pragmatic. And personally, I believe in small wins to keep us going for the long run. And I think that this makes part of, we need to meet people where they are. If it's either the GCF and their processes, if it's the local country and the capacity building and project development, for the MDBs or the private sector. And GGC does that. It's a remarkable job for us because of holding and bringing, changing perception of risk for the private sector, helping the countries understand the requirements they have to meet to access the international finance community, working with the donors in another hand. And I think that bridge, that conduit, it's more than just the leverage of dollars. It creates a whole ecosystem of behavioral change. So we're very proud to be part of this. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Maybe I'll just shift to a bit of a lightning round. I think, Aminu, I'll go to you next. I think it's a good segue from where we just left off. Your point about FX and currency and looking at it through the local lens is extremely important. And for us at Prosper Africa and at USAID, we have this instrument where we can provide that first loss to come behind and to support you exactly as we've done with GGC. And sovereign wealth funds are critical to that, and we're looking to invest more with and alongside you. And so maybe if you could speak a little bit to your vision and what you envision for Nigeria's sovereign wealth fund and why this GGC transaction was so important for you to engage in. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I'll answer that question in twofold. I think the first is local currency conservative capital would always prioritize safety, then liquidity before returns. Even though the capital is huge, even though the capital is long-term, they would always be nervous about being deployed into greenfield propositions. And so our role there is to find a way of intermediating, so to find a way of providing first loss capital that would offer that safety, that would provide that downside protection for that long-term local currency capital in order to make that shift towards financing greenfield propositions, which we have done. So I think that's the first. The second is actually Lars and myself about 9 years ago in our previous lives conceptualized, developed, and implemented a similar company called InfraCredit that was a domestic financial guarantor that was also seeking to find a way of motivating long-term domestic capital towards infrastructure financing in Nigeria. And it did two things. I think the first was it deepened our capital markets because the guarantees were provided on bonds, which was a fundamental point. And then the second was finally we're able to unlock that long-term local currency capital to finance local projects. And I think the Green Guarantee Company for the NSIA was a no-brainer because we could take this business model that had been proven through a manager that was also proven in order to apply this to what is, I believe, one of the difficult challenges of our time. Thank you.
Debbie, I'll go to you next. I think to pick up on that, how do you leverage your domestic budget and engage with multilateral partners to achieve these objectives?
Yeah, thanks, British. So I talked a little bit about our new strategy paper earlier, which really sets out what we're trying to do on mobilization. So we have a range of tools in our toolbox. We work through our DFI, British Investment International, which is really about piloting new approaches, piloting new vehicles with a strong focus on equity investment and risk sharing with private investors. And BII will make over half of its investments in the poorest and most fragile states by 2030. We also, through another vehicle that we have called Mobilist, have been demonstrating how to mobilize development finance in new markets by crowding in new investors at scale. And this is about commercializing new asset classes through public markets. So we're very proud to be investing $40 million in the Green Guarantee Company through Mobilist, because it is it's the first ever climate-focused guarantee company. That's really exciting. It will, I think, be highly innovative and groundbreaking, and we're really pleased to be supporting the kind of marketplace of ideas. We're also working with MDBs to scale up their climate lending through the provision of $6 billion worth of guarantees. And again, that's about risk sharing across Asia, Africa, the Pacific, etc. We provided a guarantee jointly with the City of London insurers, for example, to unlock climate lending to the African Development Bank through the Room to Run guarantee, which we announced last year. And of course, we're also working very closely with others on the MDBs capital adequacy framework review through the G20. So that there's a set of things here where we're trying to mobilize climate finance locally through the private infrastructure development group. We're developing a pipeline of bankable projects and then encouraging those MDBs to provide greater support for that early stage development. We're also trying to deepen domestic capital markets and make productive use of local savings, which has already been sort of picked up on the panel. And this is about, for us, using specialist guarantee companies such as the newly formed Demand Solutions in East Africa to unlock institutional investment which exists in Africa and Asia, but that we need to pull into the climate space. And then finally, we're also doing some work on currency risk, investing in solutions like the Currency Exchange Fund, which allows borrowers to receive financing in local currency, as you pointed out. And this, again, is about reducing exposure to debt distress and foreign currency exchange risk. Thanks.
Great. Thank you. Ariane, just shifting gears a little bit, how can financial institutions increase capital deployment in the adaptation space? One of our other partners in this endeavor, the MUFG, the Bank of Japan, is involved. How can we get you all a little more involved in these developing markets? Thanks.
I think, again, is the top-down, bottom-up approach. Strategically, I'm very proud of my institution from taking the lead of, we will set up, and that's the part of the team that I'm part of blended finance with an angle in climate finance. And that's the strategic manner of you setting a direction in your institution strategy, but then also the bottom-up of the change of the mindset and how you work with these projects. And I think as large banks, scale comes through large single transactions, whereas for adaptation, it is scale through replication. And we see that with GGC, taking a programmatic approach. So you replicate let's say your marginal cost per transaction will always decrease because you're getting the knowledge, the infrastructure, because additionality, monitoring of impact, all these are things that needs economies of scale. If you are doing single one-off transactions, they're nice. You can add in your pitch deck throughout the years, but then they don't move the needle. So really for us in MUFG, we've been really thinking programs, platforms, and that's where the work with the GCF, with the World Bank, with the donors is so important, of bringing everyone with what they can offer the best, understanding the risks which we'll have to bridge, and the types, it's not that there are more risks that we'll have to take more risk. We're taking now different risks. I think as a bank, if we look at our portfolio of traditional lending, how is that exposed to physical risk, climate, physical risk, to infrastructure, to all that? So the adaptation is very much overlapping to that, and it's how do you integrate. So that's very important for us. But again, on GGC, just one thing for us is the matter of when you talk, and I don't know how many people here do fundraising or go talk to banks, institutional investors, the first thing is adaptation. There is no cash flow streams. The private sector can't finance it. And I think GGC does a work that in the mid-term is the same as insurance companies, that how do you give value to adaptation and resilience? I think guarantee and insurance is a great way. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. The insurance, the cost of not having that asset, is that cost could be a lever to create the value. So we see very transformative platforms like that able to move us. So thank you.
Turn back to you, and you'll talk to us a little bit about where you left off. Thanks.
Okay, thank you so much. Say three things that I think we can do to leverage all the climate financing that's going to help it go to those who are most vulnerable and go to local levels. So the first thing I want to say is that we need more evidence and knowledge on how to do this, and we need to support our clients on building the decentralized fiscal systems that bring the resources in an accountable way to local communities. And so for us, we're launching today, we're continuing today. We launched it formally yesterday, our Locally Led learning platform for Locally Led Climate Action. So a learning and knowledge platform, which will help us bring clients together, bring donors together to share information on what works for promoting locally led action, but also on building the evidence base and, depending on the resources that we get, on piloting with countries to build their fiscal systems to bring resources to local levels. Because in Kenya, it was a result of a 20-year decentralization process that allowed the FLOCA project to happen. Second is putting attention on the accountability. So much of the focus in COP and in general in the climate dialogue is on where's the money, and we need more money. But we need to put also attention on making sure that the money we have is spent in an accountable way. And we call this green accountability, and enhancing the capacity of local governments, of civil society, to have access to information on climate spending and to build their capacity to track it and influence and engage in a participatory dialogue. Today we're launching a green accountability initiative with World Resource Institute to provide climate finance or support to NGOs in 5 countries to build their capacity to engage in green accountability. And third is the broader call for action that I would say to all of us on setting better standards for carbon markets, both the voluntary carbon markets where there are already many standards, but strengthening those standards around FPIC, around stakeholder engagement, grievance redress mechanisms, and taking them also to carbon markets under Article 6, and more broadly under sustainable finance. We always talk about ESG, but where's the S? And building out that S and strengthening client capacity to have stronger institutions to manage social risk and to ensure communities are involved and heard and consulted, that will help us leverage climate finance and public finance. And then the final word to say is this is, as Administrator Powers said, an inflection point for all of us. And just to say it's an opportunity for huge innovation. And being on a panel with private sector makes me think of all the opportunities we have to explore social bonds, indigenous carbon credits, and to take this agenda even further. Thank you.
Thanks, Louise. And so just to close us out last, we're all so excited about where we can go with the Green Guarantee Company, but maybe just to close us out, to double click, why is this needed and what's the impact that you're hoping to achieve?
Thanks, British. In terms of why it's needed, well, I think a lot of people have been saying from the beginning of a COP about the climate finance gap and how we need to get private sector investment in. Well, I actually think about the example, how guarantees can work. You need to look at U.S. history, actually. In the 60s and early 70s, infrastructure in the U.S. was not getting invested in by U.S. investors. Pension funds in the U.S. were not investing in their own infrastructure. That led to the creation of what was called the monoline industry, monoline insurance industry, which was basically guarantors. They were set up and they started providing guarantees to investors to invest in their own infrastructure, in their own country. Fundamentally, over a couple of decades, the whole momentum shifted to the point that actually those insurers were not required. So from a group of, say, 10 insurers, there's only like 1 left now. That shows how guarantees have transformed that market in the U.S. That is what we're trying to do with climate finance. We're trying to come in and play that role of basically being a trusted partner that can actually, that investors can work with. A lot of the panelists have actually highlighted the things that are needed here. You know, we can come in and we can look at a project in an emerging market. We can basically say, we're happy with this. We're happy to provide a 100% guarantee to you. Come and join us and work with us to finance this project. And once you're in there, over time, we'll support you on reporting and all the other things that you need to feel comfortable, so that eventually you get to a point where you start to understand for yourself exactly what these risks are and how you can take them and measure them and mitigate them without the need of a guarantee. That is ultimately what we're trying to do. Nobody is prepared to do that in the market today. That's why we're creating the Green Guarantee Company. And what we want to try and achieve, well, we have the modest ambition of trying to be $6 billion in terms of portfolio size in 10 years. Obviously, that's still a drop in the ocean in terms of what's needed, But our job isn't to fix the whole problem, it's to be catalytic. It's about market transformation, changing the psychology of the market to want to do it themselves. That is what we want to try and achieve. Yeah.
Just a few closing remarks. Thank you all for that. And please join me in thanking the incredible panel for sharing their knowledge. We've heard about a range of fascinating approaches and clearly concrete interventions that leverage financial innovation, capital, and new expertise in driving and addressing the climate change challenge. And that market transformation and that catalytic role is absolutely critical. And we're thrilled and grateful to partner along all of you as Prosper Africa and USAID. Accelerated risk mitigation is something that we heard from all of the panelists today. That's going to be provided by the green guarantee companies so that private capital can take and understand risks in developing markets at scale. They're critical solution at this time in this moment. In fact, we at Prosper Africa are doubling down on this approach, and I'm thrilled to announce today that under the Africa Trade and Investment Program at Prosper Africa and USAID, we've opened up a window, a dedicated window, to receive the best programs for scale-level climate finance transactions, funds, and facilities, starting at $150 million. We hope that you all will apply, share your best ideas, and submit them to receive catalytic grant funding from Prosper Africa. We believe these transactions will have a demonstrative effect on private and public sector actors alike for what's possible for African economies in the 21st century. Again, please join me in thanking our panelists, and we are right on time. We look forward to partnering with you all in the future. If you want to learn more, please see our panelists or go to prosperafrica.gov. Thank you again.